The elevator lurched, metal screaming against metal, and my heart slammed into my throat. I grabbed the handrail, my knuckles widening, as the lights flickered and died, plunging us into near darkness. Then, from the shadows, his voice low, steady, and infuriatingly calm said, "Well, this is one way to break the ice." I'm Ethan Carter, 24, a graphic designer who'd rather sketch in a quiet coffee shop than deal with, well, this. I'd been riding the elevator up to my new job at a sleek ad agency in downtown Chicago, my portfolio tucked under my arm, when the world decided to throw me a curveball. The guy standing across from me, the one who'd just spoken, was Lucas Reed, 26, a personal trainer whose confidence radiated like heat. I'd seen him around the building before, hard to miss someone built like he spent half his life lifting weights, with blonde hair cropped close and green eyes that seemed to see right through you. We'd never spoken, just exchanged nods in passing, but now we were stuck together in a 6-by-6-foot metal box, suspended God knows where between floors. The emergency light kicked on, casting a faint red glow. Lucas leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying me like I was a puzzle he was determined to solve. "You okay, man?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost concerned. "I'm fine," I lied, my palms sweaty against the rail. Heights didn't scare me, but being trapped, that was a whole different beast. My mind raced. How long would we be stuck? What if the cables snapped? What if? "Relax," Lucas said, stepping closer. "They'll get us out. Just breathe." His hand brushed my arm, and I froze, not because of the contact, but because of the way it made my pulse spike. I wasn't out. Not really. I'd known I was gay since high school, but I'd kept it locked away, buried under late-night sketches and excuses about being too busy to date. Chicago was supposed to be my fresh start, a place where I could finally be myself. But here I was, trapped with a guy who looked like he could bench press me and who was definitely not helping my resolve to stay cool. "You always this jumpy?" Lucas asked, a smirk tugging at his lips. He was close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something woodsy, grounding. It was maddening. "Only when I'm stuck in a death trap," I shot back, trying to sound braver than I felt. He chuckled, and the sound was warm, like it could thaw the panic in my chest. I didn't know it then, but that moment, the flicker of his smile, the way his eyes held mine, was the spark that would ignite everything. The elevator groaned again, and my stomach dropped. Lucas didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for the emergency phone, his movements calm, deliberate. "Let's see what's up," he said, pressing the button. Static crackled, then a bored voice answered, promising a technician within the hour. An hour. 60 minutes in a confined space with Lucas Reed, who was now looking at me like he knew something I didn't. "So," he said, leaning back again. "First day at the agency. Huh. Saw you with that portfolio. You an artist or something?" I nodded, clutching the leather case like a lifeline. "Graphic designer. Just moved here from Ohio." "Ohio. Huh. Big change." His eyes softened, and I wondered what he saw when he looked at man, nervous kid from the Midwest. Probably trying to play it cool in a city that felt too big. "I'm Lucas, by the way. Trainer at the gym on the 5th floor." "Ethan," I said, my voice steadier now. "Nice to meet you, I guess." He grinned, and it was the kind of grin that could unravel you if you let it. "Oh, we're gonna be real good friends by the time we get out of here." I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. The air felt heavier now, Not just because of the stale elevator smell, but because of the way Lucas was watching me. Like he was waiting for something. My heart was pounding. And not just from the claustrophobia. I'd spent years building walls around myself, keeping people at arm's length. But Lucas, he was already too close. And we'd only been stuck for 10 minutes. The elevator creaked again, and I flinched. Lucas stepped even closer, his hand steadying me this time, firm on my shoulder. "Hey," he said, his voice low. "You're not alone in this. Okay." I nodded, swallowing hard. His hand lingered, and for a moment, I let myself feel the warmth, the strength, the possibility. Then the emergency phone buzzed, and the moment shattered. The technician was on their way. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with something else: disappointment. Because even though I was terrified, part of me didn't want this to end. The technician's voice was a lifeline, but it didn't stop the walls from closing in. I sat on the elevator floor, knees pulled to my chest, trying to focus on anything but the way the air seemed to thicken with every passing minute. Lucas, infuriatingly relaxed, slid down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. "You ever been stuck like this before?" he asked, stretching his legs out. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp, like he was trying to gauge how close I was to losing it. "Nope," I said, forcing a laugh. "First time for everything, right?" I glanced at him, and my breath caught. The red emergency light painted his features in soft shadows, making his jawline sharper, his eyes greener. I looked away, fast, before he could notice. "First times are always memorable," he said, and there was a weight to his words that made my stomach flip. Was he flirting? No, he couldn't be. Guys like Lucas, confident, charming, built like they belonged on a magazine, covered in flirt with awkward guys like me. Did they? I needed to change the subject. "So, how long you been a trainer?" I asked, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. 3 years, he said. Moved to Chicago after college. Thought I'd be a lawyer, but turns out I'm better at helping people lift weights than reading law books. He grinned, and I couldn't help but smile back. There was something disarming about him, like he could make you forget the world was falling apart. "What about you?" he asked. "Why graphic design?" I hesitated. Talking about myself always felt like walking a tightrope. "I've always liked drawing," I said finally. "It's safe. You can create whole worlds without anyone judging you." I stopped, realizing how much I'd revealed. Lucas didn't laugh or brush it off. Instead, he nodded, like he understood. "Safe's good," he said. "But sometimes you gotta step out of that comfort zone. You know." His knee nudged mine, and I swear my heart stopped for a second. I wasn't ready for this, whatever this was. I'd spent so long hiding who I was, convincing myself I'd come out when the time was right. But Lucas was making right feel a lot closer than I'd planned. The elevator jolted, and I grabbed his arm instinctively. He didn't pull away. "We're good," he said, his voice steady. "Just the cables settling. Probably." His hand covered mine, warm and sure, and I didn't let go. "Not right away. Tell me something about you," he said, his thumb brushing my wrist. "Something nobody else knows." I froze. Nobody knew about Minute, the real me. Not my parents, who thought I was just focused on my career. Not my college roommates, who'd assumed I was shy around girls. But Lucas's eyes were locked on mine, and for the first time, I wanted to say it. To let it out. "I'm not good at trusting people," I said, dodging the truth. Guess that's why I'm freaking out right now. He tilted his head, studying me. Trust is hard. But you're doing okay so far. His smile was small, private, like it was just for me. I wanted to believe him, but years of keeping secrets don't vanish in an elevator. The phone buzzed again. The technician was closer 20 minutes, maybe less. Panic flared in my chest, not because we'd be rescued, but because this moment, this bubble with Lucas, was about to burst. I didn't want to go back to being the guy who hid behind his sketchbook. Lucas, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What's something you don't tell people? He leaned back, his shoulders still against mine. I'm not as confident as I look, he said after a pause. People see the muscles, the smile, and think I've got it all figured out. But half the time, I'm just trying to keep up. I stared at him, stunned. He was admitting weakness. To me. You don't seem like you're struggling, I said. He laughed, soft and bitter. That's the trick, Ethan. Fake it till you make it. His eyes met mine again, and this time, there was no smirk, no bravado. Just Lucas, raw and real. I don't know what made me do it, maybe the adrenaline, maybe the way he was looking at me, but I leaned closer. I'm gay, I blurted out, the words spilling before I could stop them. My face burned, and I braced for rejection, for the awkward silence I'd always feared. But Lucas didn't flinch. He just smiled, slow and warm, and said, "Good to know. I'm bi." And then, before I could process that, he leaned in and kissed me. His lips were warm, firm, and completely unexpected. My mind blanked, the world narrowing to the press of his mouth against mine, the faint stubble grazing my skin. For a split second, I was too shocked to kiss back, but then instinct took over, and I leaned into him, my hands finding his shoulders. Lucas pulled back first, his eyes searching mine. Too much? He asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. It was the first time I'd seen him anything less than certain. No, I said, my voice shaky but sure. Just surprising. My heart was racing, but not from fear anymore. I'd spent years imagining what it would be like to be this close to someone, to let myself feel this without shame. And now, here I was, in a broken elevator with a guy I barely knew, feeling more alive than ever. He grinned, and the tension in his shoulders eased. Good. Didn't want to scare you off. He brushed a strand of hair from my forehead, his touch gentle but electric. You've got no idea how long I've been wanting to do that. Wait. What? I blinked, my brain struggling to catch up. You've seen me before. Lucas laughed, the sound filling the small space. Dude, you think I nod at every guy in this building. I've seen you sketching in the lobby, all focused and intense. Hard not to notice. I felt my face heat up. I'd always thought I was invisible, blending into the background with my headphones and sketchbook. But Lucas had noticed me. Me. The guy who'd spent his life trying not to be seen. Before I could respond, the elevator shuddered again, harder this time. I grabbed the handrail, my pulse spiking. Lucas's hand found mine, steadying me. We're okay, he said, but his voice was tighter now, like he wasn't entirely sure. The emergency phone crackled. We're almost there, the technician said. Hang tight. I should have been relieved, but all I could think about was how little time we had left in this strange, suspended moment. So, Lucas said, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. You gonna tell me more about Ethan Carter? Or do I have to keep guessing? I laughed, the sound surprising me. What do you want to know? Everything, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. But let's start with why you moved to Chicago. Fresh start. I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah. Back in Ohio. I didn't fit. Small town. Everyone knows everyone. Hard to be yourself when you're afraid of what they'll think. Lucas's expression softened. I get that. Grew up in a place like that too. Took me a while to figure out who I was, and even longer to be okay with it. I wanted to ask more, to dig into his story, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said, you make it look easy. Being you. He shook his head. It's not. But you fake it enough. It starts to feel real. He paused, then added, you don't have to fake it with me, Ethan. Just so you know. My breath hitched. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. I'd spent so long hiding, convincing myself I was protecting my heart. But Lucas was tearing down those walls with every word, every touch. The elevator groaned again, and this time, the lights flickered back on, harsh and bright. I squinted, my eyes adjusting, and Lucas's face came into sharp focus. He was still holding my hand, his grip firm but not possessive. Looks like our time's almost up, he said, but he didn't let go. Guess so, I said, my voice barely audible. I didn't want this to end, not the kiss, not the conversation, not the feeling of being seen for the first time in years. Hey, Lucas said, tilting my chin up so I'd meet his eyes. This doesn't have to end here. You know that, right? I nodded, but doubt crept in. What if this was just a moment? What if we stepped out of this elevator and he went back to his life, and I went back to mine? I'd been hurt before, not by anyone specific, but by the weight of expectations, of hiding, of pretending. The phone buzzed again. We're prying the doors open now, the technician said. Stand back. Lucas stood, pulling me up with him. His hand lingered on mine for a second longer before he let go. Ready? He asked. I wasn't. But I nodded anyway. The elevator doors screeched open, revealing a crowd of faces: maintenance workers, a few curious office types, and a paramedic who looked more annoyed than concerned. Lucas stepped out first, his confidence back in full force, but he glanced back to make sure I was following. I clutched my portfolio, my legs shaky, and stepped into the hallway, the world feeling too big, too loud after the cocoon of the elevator. You guys okay? The technician asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Took us a bit, but you're free now. Thanks, Lucas said, his voice steady, but his eyes were on me, checking if I was holding it together. I nodded, forcing a smile, but my mind was spinning. That kiss. His words. The way he'd seen me. It was all too much. And now we were back in reality, where I didn't know the rules. The paramedic checked us over quickly, pulse, breathing, the usual. I barely heard her questions. My focus on Lucas, who was chatting with the technician like getting stuck in an elevator was just another Tuesday. He caught my eye and winked, and my stomach did that flip thing again. God, I was in trouble. Once we were cleared, the crowd dispersed, leaving us alone in the hallway. I shifted my weight, unsure what to say. So, thanks for keeping me calm in there, I mumbled, staring at my shoes. Lucas grinned, stepping closer. My pleasure. You're kinda cute when you're freaking out. I laughed, despite myself. Gee, thanks. But the compliment warmed me, even if I didn't know how to handle it. You got plans now? he asked, leaning against the wall, all casual confidence. Where you want to grab a coffee? Debrief. I hesitated. Coffee sounded safe, but it also sounded like a step into something bigger, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. I should probably get to work, I said, glancing at the elevator bank. First day and all. Right, he said, but he didn't look convinced. Well, I'm on the 5th floor if you change your mind. Or, if you get stuck in another elevator. He handed me a business card. Lucas Reed, personal trainer, with a phone number scrawled in pen. Call me, Ethan. I mean it. I took the card, my fingers brushing his, and nodded. Yeah. Okay. But as he walked away, his stride easy and sure, doubt crept in. What if this was just a fleeting thing for him? A story to laugh about later. I'd spent so long protecting myself. I didn't know how to let someone in. The rest of my day was a blur. I met my new boss, toured the agency, and sat through a meeting about branding campaigns. But my mind kept drifting to Lucas. To the kiss. To the way he'd said, "You don't have to fake it with me." By the time I left the office, the sun was setting over Chicago, painting the skyline in gold and pink. I pulled out his card, running my thumb over the ink. I didn't call him that night. Or the next. Fear got the better of my fear of rejection, of judgment, of finally letting myself want something real. But Lucas wasn't so easy to shake. 2 days later, I found him waiting in the lobby, leaning against a pillar with that damn grin. Thought you might need a reminder, he said, holding up 2 coffee cups. You didn't call, so I'm bringing the coffee to you. I stared, caught off guard. You waited for me? Yup. He handed me a cup, his fingers lingering against mine. Figured you're worth the effort. My chest tightened, a mix of warmth and panic. No one had ever called me worth the effort before. We sat on a bench outside, sipping coffee and talking about his clients. My sketches. The way Chicago felt like a second chance for both of us. He didn't push, didn't bring up the kiss, but the air between us crackled with possibility. By the time we parted ways, I knew I couldn't keep running. Lucas was offering me something I'd never had: someone who saw me, really saw me, and didn't look away. But letting him in meant facing parts of myself I'd buried for years. And that scared me more than any elevator ever could. A week later, I was still carrying Lucas's card in my wallet, like a talisman I was too afraid to use. We'd texted a few times, light, flirty messages that made my heart race, but I kept him at arm's length. Work was my excuse, but the truth was messier. I'd spent so long hiding who I was. I didn't know how to stop. Every time I thought about calling him, my mind conjured worst-case scenarios: him losing interest, me screwing it up, or worse, someone finding out before I was ready. But Lucas wasn't giving up. He'd show up in the lobby some mornings, always with coffee or a joke, always with that smile that made my defenses wobble. One evening, he texted me, "Meet me at the lakefront. 7 p.m. No excuses. I stared at the message for 10 minutes, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Finally, I typed, "Okay." Lake Michigan stretched out like a dark mirror under the evening sky, the city lights reflecting on its surface. Lucas was waiting by the Adler Planetarium, his silhouette sharp against the water. He wore a leather jacket, his hands in his pockets, and when he saw me, his face lit up. "Thought you might bail," he said, falling into step beside me as we walked along the path. "Almost did," I admitted, shoving my hands in my jeans. "I'm not great at this." "At what?" "Hanging out." He nudged my shoulder, his tone teasing but kind. "You're doing fine, Ethan." We walked in silence for a while, the sound of waves lapping against the shore calming my nerves. Lucas didn't push, didn't fill the quiet with small talk, and I was grateful. Finally, I said, "I'm not out. Not to anyone. Not even my family." He nodded, like he'd already guessed. "That's a lot to carry." "Yeah." My voice cracked, and I looked away, embarrassed. I thought moving here would make it easier, but it's still hard. I don't know how to be me. Lucas stopped walking, turning to face me. "You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time. And I'm here, if you want me to be." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same vulnerability he'd shown in the elevator. He wasn't just the confident guy with the perfect smile. He was someone who'd fought his own battles, who'd learned to be himself in a world that didn't always make it easy. "I want you to be," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" he asked, stepping closer. "Of everything," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Of messing this up. Of people finding out. Of feeling too much." He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "You're not going to mess this up. And if anyone's got a problem with you, they'll have to deal with me." I laughed, the sound shaky but real. "You're going to fight the world for me." "If I have to," he said, and the seriousness in his eyes made my breath catch. He leaned in, and this time, I met him halfway. The kiss was softer than the one in the elevator, less desperate, but no less intense. It felt like a promise, like maybe I could be brave enough to want this. We spent the rest of the evening walking, talking, laughing. Lucas told me about his first Crusha guy on his high school football team who never knew how he felt. I told him about the sketches I'd hidden from my parents, drawings of boys I'd never dared to show anyone. It was the most honest I'd ever been, and with every word, I felt lighter, like I was finally stepping out of the shadows. By the time we said goodnight, I knew I was falling for him. Not just because of the kisses or the way he looked at me, but because he made me want to be the version of myself I'd always been too afraid to be. But the world outside our little bubble was still there, waiting to test us. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. Falling for Lucas was like standing at the edge of a cliff, exhilarating, terrifying, and impossible to turn back from. We started spending more time together, coffee runs, late-night walks, even a few workouts at his gym where I mostly embarrassed myself trying to keep up with him. Every moment with him felt like a step towards something bigger, but the fear never fully went away. I was still hiding, still dodging questions from coworkers about my weekend plans, still avoiding my parents' calls. One night, Lucas invited me to his apartment for dinner. Nothing fancy, he'd said, but when I walked in, I found candles on the table, pasta simmering on the stove, and music playing softly in the background. He'd gone all out, and it made my heart ache in the best way. "You didn't have to do all this," I said, setting my jacket on the couch. "Wanted to," he said, stirring the sauce with a grin. "You deserve it." Dinner was perfect, laughs, stories, and a warmth I hadn't felt in years. But as we sat on his couch afterward, wine glasses in hand, the conversation turned serious. "You ever think about telling your family?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. I tensed, staring into my glass. "All the time. But they're traditional. My dad's a pastor. My mom thinks being gay is a choice you can pray away. If I tell them, it'll break their hearts." Lucas set his glass down, his hand finding mine. It's not about breaking their hearts. It's about living your truth. You can't carry their expectations forever. I know, I said, my voice thick. But what if they hate me? Then you've got me, he said simply. And you'll find people who love you for you. Like I do. I froze, the words hitting me like a tidal wave. You love me. He smiled, a little shy, a little bold. Yeah, Ethan. I do. Didn't plan on it. But here we are. I didn't know what to say, so I kissed him instead. It was messy, emotional, and perfect. But even as I lost myself in him, a part of me was screaming that this was too good to last, that the world would find a way to tear us apart. The next day, reality came crashing in. I was at work, tweaking a logo design, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom, coming to Chicago next weekend. Can't wait to see you. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen my parents in months, and now they were coming here, to the city where I was finally starting to be myself. I hadn't planned on telling them, yet maybe not ever, but Lucas's words echoed in my head. Live your truth. I didn't tell Lucas about the visit right away. I needed time to think, to figure out how to navigate this. But he noticed something was off when we met for lunch the next day. You okay? He asked, his hand brushing mine under the table. I forced a smile. Yeah, just family stuff. He didn't push, but his eyes said he wasn't buying it. Whenever you're ready to talk, I'm here. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I wanted to be the person Lucas saw, brave, honest, whole. But the thought of facing my parents, of seeing disappointment in their eyes, made me feel like I was back in that elevator, trapped and suffocating. I didn't know how to move forward without losing something, either them or myself. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was a wreck. Lucas offered to come with me to meet them, but I said no. This was something I had to do alone. Or so I thought. My parents arrived on a crisp Chicago morning, their smiles wide as they hugged me in the hotel lobby. They looked the same, dad with his salt and pepper beard, mom with her neatly pressed blouse, but I felt like a stranger in their presence. We spent the day sightseeing, their chatter about home filling the air, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Lucas's words, his touch, the person I was becoming with him. At dinner, in a cozy Italian restaurant, the weight of it all became too much. Mom was talking about a neighbor's wedding, how I'd find the right girl someday, and I snapped. I'm not looking for a girl, I said, my voice louder than I'd meant. The table went silent. Dad frowned, his fork hovering. What do you mean, Ethan? I took a deep breath, my hands trembling under the table. I'm gay. I've known for years. And I'm with someone. His name's Lucas. Mom's face crumpled, her hand flying to her mouth. Dad just stared, his jaw tight. This isn't you, he said finally. You're confused. We raised you better than this. The words cut deeper than I'd expected, but they also lit a fire in me. No, Dad. This is me. And I'm done hiding it. Mom started crying, and Dad shook his head, like he could will the truth away. We need time, he said, his voice cold. We'll talk about this later. I left the restaurant feeling like I'd lost something, but also like I'd gained something bigger. I called Lucas, my voice shaking as I told him what happened. Can I come over? I asked. I'm already on my way, he said, and 20 minutes later, he was at my apartment, pulling me into his arms. I didn't cry, I was too numb for that, but his warmth grounded me, kept me from falling apart. You did good, he said, his lips brushing my forehead. That took guts. Did it? I asked, my voice muffled against his chest. They might never speak to me again. They will, he said, certain. Or they won't. But either way, you're not alone. We stayed like that for hours, talking, holding each other, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I'd faced my biggest fear, and I was still standing. Because of Lucas. Because of me. The next day, I got a text from Mom. We're sorry we reacted badly. We love you. Can we talk? It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was a start. I showed Lucas, and he squeezed my hand. Told you, he said, grinning. I laughed, and it felt like freedom. Months later, Lucas and I were still together, navigating the messy, beautiful reality of being us. My parents were trying. Feed started calling again, asking cautious questions about Lucas, about my life. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I'd started being more open at work, too, mentioning Lucas in casual conversation, letting myself be seen. Each step felt like a victory, small but seismic. One evening, we were back in that same building, riding the elevator to a friend's party on the 10th floor. I tensed as the doors closed, memories of that first day flooding back. Lucas noticed. Of course, they always did. You okay? He asked, his hand finding mine. Yeah, I said, and this time, I meant it. Just déjà vu. He laughed, pulling me close. Want to make it a tradition. Get stuck. Make out. Fall in love. I rolled my eyes, but my heart was full. You're ridiculous. And you love it, he said, kissing me just as the elevator dinged and the doors opened. We stepped out, hand in hand, into a world that felt a little less heavy. I wasn't afraid anymore, not of the elevator, not of myself, not of us. Lucas had shown me what it meant to be brave, to love without apology, and I was ready to keep learning. Together. That night, as we danced under string lights at the party, I realized something. Getting trapped in that elevator wasn't just a fluke. It was the moment that set me free. And Lucas, he was the one who didn't wait to make the first move, who saw me when I couldn't see myself. For that, I'd be forever grateful.